Matter of hours, lawyers for a woman sitting on death row for the 2005 kidnapping and murder of a Jacksonville couple will go before the Florida Supreme Court.
How are you?
They are Tiffany Cole, now 33, Amelia Carr, now 30. Two separate crimes, two separate lives. Two young women come down the hall, waving, smiling together like girlfriends.
Life row? Why?
Because we're not dying, we're living.
Do you ever think I might be executed?
No, you can't have that mentality.
Until they became neighbors on the notorious corridor.
Do you call it death row?
No, we call it life row.
It's life row.
It means you've accepted
You've already
this.
died. You've already died.
Yeah, you
You're
cannot
already
have
dead.
that mentality.
And we believe that they got fair trial, and we believe that they got, what was due to them.
But please remember that I didn't do this. I'm not the monster that created this, but I am sorry I met him.
Number 3, Tennessee's evil, Krista Pike. What's the difference between being 17 years old and being 18? In Krista Gale Pike's case, her lawyers say, the difference is an execution sentence. The state wants to set an execution date for Pike, now 46, and the only woman on Tennessee's execution row. She was 18 years old when she and 2 other participants in a Knoxville job program for troubled teens slayed Colleen Slemmer in a remote spot on the University of Tennessee's agriculture campus. Pike, her boyfriend Tadaril Shipp, and fellow Job Corps student Shadala Peterson lured Slemmer, 19, to campus the night of January 12, 1995. Once there, Slemmer was beaten, cut, and bludgeoned to her end with a rock.
Colleen Slemmer's mother says she would like to see a date scheduled for Krista Pike to be executed.
What I want to see from the judge right now would be to get a date and put her down instead of waiting another year or another day.
Pike was sentenced to death in 1996 for brutally killing the 19-year-old near the UT Ag campus.
Pike kept a piece of her skull as a souvenir. Investigators identified a love triangle between Pike, Shipp, and Slemmer as the motive for the crime. Only Pike received an execution sentence for her role in the slaying. Peterson cooperated with investigators and walked away with probation. Shipp was 17, too young to be put to infinite sleep. He's serving a life sentence and will be eligible for parole in 2028. Pike's legal team cites that difference in the new court filing, asking the Tennessee Supreme Court to delay her execution or recommend it be stopped altogether. Mr. Shipp was 17 years old at the time of Miss Slemmer's passing. Krista Pike was 18. That is the difference between an execution sentence and parole eligibility in 2028, reads the filing signed by defense attorneys Stephen Farrell and Kelly Gleason. That difference cannot be equated with increased maturity or brain development. Krista was not more mature or more responsible than Mr. Shipp. The Tennessee Attorney General's office is asking the High Court to set an execution date for Pike, contending she has exhausted her appeals. But Pike's defense team says it's still too soon. They've lodged several arguments, including one centered on her mental illness and youth at the time of the crime. A jury condemned Pike in March 1996. 9 years later, the U.S. Supreme Court abolished the juvenile execution penalty in the landmark case Roper v. Simmons. The court held that executing people who committed slaying before they turned 18 violates the Constitution's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment because they cannot with reliability be classified among the worst offenders. The court cited 3 main differences between juveniles and adults. Juveniles lack maturity and responsibility. They are more vulnerable to negative influences, and their character is not fully formed. The court drew the line at 18, but Pike's attorneys argue its logic should extend beyond that. They point to scientific research that the brain isn't fully developed until after age 20, and that there's no way to differentiate between the brains of young people. The lawyers paint Shipp, not Pike, as the ringleader of the group. Shipp was violent and controlling, they write, while Pike was suffering from undiagnosed bipolar disorder and brain damage after a childhood filled with physical misconduct. Her mother drank while she was in the womb, and she was twice misappropriated as a child. Number 2, love triangle turned fatal, Amelia Carr. In February 2009, Marion County, Florida was rocked by a heinous crime that would leave 1 woman lifeless and 2 people behind bars. Heather Strong, a 26-year-old mother of 2, was working at an Iron Skillet restaurant at a Petro gas station next to Interstate Route 75 in Reddick when she disappeared without a trace. Her husband, Joshua Fulgham, was later convicted of her slaying and sentenced to life in prison without parole, but he wasn't the only one involved in the crime. Enter Amelia Lily Carr, the second of 3 sisters born to Cuban immigrants. A bright young woman, Carr's IQ was estimated to be 125 by a psychologist. However, her childhood was marred by tragedy and mistreatment. At the age of 15, she reported physical misconduct by her father to her school, but withdrew her statement to officials. It was a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Carr had been engaged to Fulham in November 2008, but he instead married Heather Strong just 1 month later. However, Carr continued to maintain contact with them and even babysat Strong's 2 children, according to Carr's family. It's unclear what led Carr to take the drastic step of participating in Strong's slaying, but jealousy and betrayal are believed to have been the main motives. On February 15, 2009, Heather Strong disappeared from the Iron Skillet restaurant where she worked. Her husband, Joshua Fulham, was suspected for fraud for using her credit cards after she disappeared, but there was no evidence to link him to her mat that time. It wasn't until March 19, over a month later, that her remains were discovered in a shallow grave near McIntosh, Florida. The investigation quickly led to Carr, who had been arrested on March 24 after making numerous statements to authorities without the presence of an attorney. Detectives also recorded undercover audio of Carr discussing details of the crime with Fulham's sister. At the time, Carr was 7 months pregnant with Fulham's child. She was not even 30 at the time. The details that emerged from the investigation were nothing short of gruesome. Carr had tricked Strong into coming to the storage trailer behind the home of Carr's mother, Maria. Once there, Carr placed a plastic bag over Strong's head after unsuccessfully trying to break her neck. Strong eventually passed away of asphyxiation while bound by duct tape to a computer chair. Carr then buried her body in a shallow grave. Carr was placed in custody at Marion County Jail, where she gave birth to her 4th child. All of her children were placed in foster care. Carr provided a confession to investigators, but claimed that she had only done so in the hope of being reunited with her children.
The youngest woman on death row convicted of another horrifying murder, helping her boyfriend suffocate his wife.
I was shaking so bad.
There is a police tape of Amelia after her boyfriend confessed. She's 8 months pregnant with his child.
He asked me to charge.
She admits she was there, but says not when the wife was actually killed. Her lawyer argued there was no physical evidence.
During the penalty phase of her trial, Carr's family testified on her behalf that she had been traumatized since her early childhood by physical misconduct from her father and grandfather. However, the jury voted 7-5 on December 10 in favor of the penalty for Carr. She was formally sentenced to demise by lethal injection on February 22, 2011. More than a year after Carr's conviction, Joshua Fulham went on trial for his alleged participation in the slaying in April 2012. Carr, on penalty row at the Lowell Correctional Institution Annex, refused to testify at the trial. The prosecution detailed the gruesome aspects of the crime, with both the prosecution and Fulham's defense attorneys agreeing that the motives for Heather Strong's slaying were jealousy and betrayal.
The duct tape, the asphyxiation. What do you feel?
But when the judge gave her her sentence, he called her cold and said, "May God have mercy on your soul."
Hard to answer because it's like I wasn't where all that happened.
At the conclusion of his trial, Fulham was convicted of first-degree slaying and kidnapping and formally sentenced to life in prison without parole. Number 1, Buried Alive, the Tiffany Cole mystery. The case of Tiffany Ann Cole was a true tale of greed and deception, one that ultimately led to the brutal slayings of James and Carol Sumner. But was Cole a diabolical mastermind or an unknowing participant? The trial court had to decide her fate, and the events that unfolded were hard to digest. Cole had once been a neighbor of the Sumners, so they trusted her when she and her boyfriend, Michael Jackson, came to visit them in Florida in June of 2005. But little did the Sumners know, Cole and her co-conspirators had a sinister plan to kidnap and slay them to steal their money.
Neighbors of her family first robbed, then buried alive in a grave.
3 weeks.
3 weeks. And had you ever been in trouble?
Both say they were sexually abused as children and both met the wrong guy. Tiffany says she barely knew her boyfriend.
Didn't know what was coming, and that's all I'm gonna say about that. I am not the same person anymore. I have peace, I have joy.
They had even dug a grave for them in Charlton County, Georgia, 2 days before showing up at their doorstep and asking to use the phone. Reggie Sumner was choked and forced to give the intruders his ATM card and its access number. He and his wife were then bound and gagged with duct tape and put into the trunk of their car. Cole and her accomplices drove the Sumners across the border to Georgia, where they were blindfolded, bound, and pushed into the grave they had dug earlier. And then, the unthinkable happened. James and Carol Sumner were buried alive. But the crime didn't stop there. Cole subsequently pawned jewelry and other items stolen from the Sumners' home, and the ATM card was used to obtain more than $1,000 in cash. The group was tracked down and arrested, and juries were shown photos of Cole and her co-defendants in a limousine, celebrating with champagne and handfuls of cash. At Cole's trial, the jury took less than 90 minutes to find her guilty of first-degree slaying. They voted 9-3 that she should receive the execution penalty.
I didn't know what was coming, and that's all I'm going to say about that. I have a sound mind. I am not the same person anymore. I have peace. I have joy.
She was ultimately sentenced to the gallows for her role in the slayings, along with 2 counts of kidnapping and 2 counts of robbery. But the question remains, was Cole a criminal mastermind, planning and executing the crime from start to finish? Or was she a mere cog in the machine, unknowing and unwilling in the heinous slayings of the Sumners? Cole claimed that she believed the crime would be a simple theft and that she did not knowingly participate in the robberies, kidnappings, or slayings. However, she was the only one of the 4 defendants to have known the Sumners previously, and when police searched the hotel where Cole, Jackson, and Wade were staying, they found the victims' driver's licenses, credit cards, checkbook, mail, and papers indicating the victims' online passwords, social security numbers, and birth dates. There was also a new laptop and bags of new merchandise, as well as the victim's coin collection. The evidence against Cole was damning, and the jury's decision to sentence her to her end was swift and decisive. But even now, years later, the case continues to raise questions about the nature of Cole's involvement in the crime. In the end, the Sumners' lives were tragically cut short by Cole and her co-conspirators. Their passings were senseless and brutal, and the pain and suffering they endured at the hands of their slayers is impossible to comprehend. The case of Tiffany Ann Cole serves as a stark reminder of the destructive power of greed and the horrific consequences that can result when good people fall prey to those who seek to do them harm. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time with more bone-chilling slaying mysteries.